Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you again. Thank you for joining us tonight for our 24th consecutive program in this weekly America at a Crossroads series. Welcome especially to our first-time audience members. We're really happy that you're here. Thanks for responding to our poll at the top of this program. It will be posted again after the program is over, so please respond so we can be guided by your sentiments as we make some additional programming plans. This virtual series is a joint venture between Jews United for Democracy and Justice and Community Advocates, Inc., whose leadership, David Lehrer, Xavier Oslovsky, Mel Levine, Caroline Kelly, and Rabbi Ken Chazen, join me in welcoming you. And thank you to our valued co-sponsors, Temple Beth Am, Temple Valley Beth Shalom, Temple Israel of Hollywood, Temple Isaiah, Leo Beck Temple, ECAR, Stephen Wise Temple, the Holocaust Museum of LA, and Jewish Center for Justice. Next week, we could not have a more relevant topic to present. Reproductive health, abortion, and healthcare. What could be more important right now to hear about and learn about? The national president of Planned Parenthood, Alexis McGill Johnson, will be joined by former congressman and healthcare guru, Henry Waxman, moderated by NPR host and journalist, Madeline Brand. The following week, we will be joined by two former secretaries of Homeland Security, Governor Ridge and Governor Napolitano, who will be in conversation with veteran journalist and former editor-in-chief of the LA Times, Jim Newton. Then David Gergen, followed by David Axelrod, and in between the two of them, we're going to be graced with a visit by Alexander Vindman, moderated by Max Boot. On the Sunday before elections, we have that wonderful 2-hour program, including Jennifer Rubin, Max Boot, Bob Shrum, and many others. You can sign up right after tonight's program. Following the election in mid-November, we will be visited by Ron Brownstein and Bill Kristol, and next week we'll have at least one and probably two more exciting programs to announce. After last night's debate, our organizing team is more committed than ever to the missions of Jews United and Community Advocates. In short, in the most basic terms, and I don't think I'm being overly melodramatic, it's about the very preservation of our democracy. And as a group, we rededicate ourselves to this virtual town hall series. The threats to our democracy are on full display each and every day. And perhaps most disturbingly, were on full view last night to those who have the stamina, or maybe I should say the stomach, to watch the so-called debate. Franklin Roosevelt once said, and I quote, "Democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely. The real safeguard of democracy, therefore, is education," close quote. We are doing our best to bring the best educators to our audience, which grows by the week. And for that, we are very grateful to you. Tell your friends, and especially those who might still be undecided about the election. And one more thing, vote early. I now will hand the program off to my extraordinary partner, David Lehrer.
Thank you, Janice. On behalf of Community Advocates, I'm pleased to join and welcome you all once again to our virtual town hall with nearly 4,500 registrants across the country. This is another extraordinary week with Trumpian events breaking each day that would have dominated another era's political discussions for weeks. From presidential tax returns to brutish presidential behavior in the national debate to undermining faith in the democratic electoral system, our heads spin from morning to night. We're pleased to be able to offer some enlightenment as to what this all means. Our efforts are to look beyond the sound bites and the facile one-liners. We've been successful over the past 6 months, and tonight should be no difference. Tonight's guest offers a truly unique perspective on presidential misconduct and the abuse of power. He literally wrote the book on how journalists can perform profound public service while they ply their craft. Carl Bernstein is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who became a legend because of his work in unearthing the Watergate scandal. That investigation has been described by a fellow journalist as, quote, maybe the single greatest reporting effort of all time. He is sought after for his analyses and insights on power and the abuse of power, themes that he has focused on in recent decades. He is widely quoted and interviewed and is a regular on CNN and other broadcast and print outlets. Warren Olney needs no introduction to this audience. This is his 7th appearance as a moderator for America at a Crossroads. He's a recipient of innumerable awards, including Emmys and Golden Mikes, and perhaps most noteworthy, his colleagues awarded him their Lifetime Achievement Award. The title of tonight's program, which Mr. Bernstein presciently gave us in July, is Donald Trump's unprecedented threat to American democracy? Is he deliberately igniting our cold civil war? Warren?
David, thank you very much. Thanks to community advocates and, of course, to Jews United for Democracy and Justice as well. Welcome to all of you in the audience, and you will get a chance to answer some questions, but, to ask some questions. But I'm going to do the questioning first, and I am delighted to have the opportunity to appear with Carl Bernstein. He's a man that I, like other thinking journalists around the country, have admired for a great many years. And Carl, it's great to know you and to be on this program with you, and thanks a lot for joining me.
Thank you. It's great to be here and with this audience.
Well, let me ask you about that title that you suggested in July, Donald Trump's unprecedented threat to American democracy. Is he deliberately igniting our cold civil war? After last night's performance, do you feel like a prophet?
Well, I think that he has ignited the cold civil war. And since I chose that title, it was not long after that you could really see him pouring the fuel onto the fire. And he has done nothing but add fuel to the fire. Last night was probably the worst that we have seen it. Let me just read you a tweet, though, that I sent out last night. In the midst of that, I said, where are the 10, 20, 30, 40 Republicans in the Senate and House who will condemn unequivocally the most despicable public utterances and embrace of evil ideology by a president in the experience of all living Americans? I think that's where we are now. There's never been any president that has expressed anything like what was expressed last night and what he has embraced. And it's not just recently that he's embraced this, but last night he gave it a full hug.
What are the specific despicable utterances that you heard last night?
I think the same ones that the whole audience heard, particularly about his refusal not only to condemn racism, but to embrace the Proud Boys and to tell them to stand by. And he was given numerous opportunities by the moderator, and we can talk also about the moderator if you want at some point, because it was a difficult job for the moderator, but he certainly did not do it with any great distinction, and that too played into what we saw last night. But also, we have a president of the United States who is threatening a kind of insurrection if he is not shown to be the winner of the election, who is really threatening almost a kind of coup if he is not declared the winner, or if he believes he is unfairly not declared the winner. He's making it clear, and also let me tell you, there's reporting on this. I've done some, others have done some. This is not just verbiage. This is not just rhetoric about his plans to not leave the presidency if indeed he is shown to be defeated, but he thinks he's not, or he decides he's not. This is a constitutional crisis such as we've never had. The whole idea of a president saying what he said last night, what he has said in recent weeks about the election, about the idea that really he's undermined already the notion of a free election. His threats to put poll watchers into the polls, as we saw what happened today, his threats to put federal marshals, we don't know yet what, or whether they're people from perhaps ICE or people from perhaps Homeland Security. We don't know what he's doing, but he is determined to thwart a free and fair election. That is fact.
If he does that, and if he sends troops, as he did, for example, in Portland, is there anything that states can do to try to maintain their own electoral process? Do you anticipate a situation where there could be sheriff's deputies, police officers, or others, even the National Guard, which is under the governor's authority. Could we see a confrontation of authorities in the street?
I think we can see all kinds of possibilities of confrontation, including violent confrontation between factions in this country. Trump is attempting to foment chaos, violence. That's the bottom line here. We don't know yet what form, it's impossible to tell what form this chaos might take. We've never been in this kind of situation where instead of committing the prestige of the presidency and the president of the United States himself to making sure there is an orderly and fair election, we have a president of the United States who is determined to thwart, undermine, and overwhelm a fair and free election. There's no question about this.
In the latter days of the Nixon administration, one of the very important figures who turned out to go down with President Nixon himself was the Attorney General of the United States, John Mitchell. How important is the role of Bill Barr, the current Attorney General of the United States, and what is he doing that is different from what other attorneys general have done?
Well, the histories of attorneys general, you go back to the Kennedy administration. In the early days of the Kennedy administration, when President John Kennedy's brother, Robert Kennedy, was the attorney general, there was a true political alliance between the President of the United States and the Attorney General. But also, the dynamic of it changed with the Civil Rights Movement, in which Robert Kennedy became a real advocate for his brother moving toward embracing the Civil Rights Movement, which he was reluctant to do and reluctant to introduce the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act that became the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but Kennedy did introduce it at his brother's urging to some extent. But Barr is sui generis almost. John Mitchell also was a law partner of Richard Nixon, and Barr is somewhat in the tradition of John Mitchell in that Mitchell became Nixon's campaign manager in 1972 after he resigned the attorney generalship to become campaign manager for Nixon. So there you had very little commitment in the Nixon presidency to the rule of law. Rather, you had a political hack who was doing the president's bidding. But Bill Barr is something else. Bill Barr has made clear that his interest is one, serving the interests of this president, no matter how outrageous his conduct, his words, his rhetoric, how illegal, how contemptuous of the law. And the Attorney General himself has shown his contemptuousness for his contempt both for the law and for fact. But more, if you go back and you look at a speech that Bill Barr gave at Notre Dame back in February, you'll see that he has an agenda himself that may transcend in some ways Trump's agenda. He spoke at great length about the danger of moral relativism in this country. And his agenda is intellectually much more consistent, broad than Trump's is, in the sense that Trump doesn't much give a damn about ideology of any kind. Trump cares about himself, his money, his power. He likes being president. He doesn't want to not be president. It's also key to his financial survival. We now know, partly from the tax returns, what many of us had reported and said before, that he really ran for the presidency as a means of bailing out himself and his family. Look, this president, Donald Trump, is the first grifter president in the history of this country. And it's not just Donald Trump, it's a grifter family. And that's one of the things we see in the tax returns, particularly Ivanka Trump's double dipping role in both deductions and taking $700,000 as a consultancy fee, et cetera, et cetera. That this is a president who has leveraged the presidency for financial gain. He didn't put his holdings in a real trust. In fact, he's put his name all over things that do business with his administration, with his government, from Mar-a-Lago to his hotel, and his sons continue to do business all over the world with foreign leaders or their representatives. If you look at the Trump businesses in Turkey, in Russia, in Azerbaijan, it's follow the money, follow the lies. That's what both the press and prosecutors need to be doing through this Trump presidency and afterwards as well.
Last night, the president denied that he had only paid $750 in 2 separate years, as reported by the New York Times from documents that they have not released yet to the public, say they can't release without revealing who their sources are. But Trump said, no, he spent billions of dollars in, or at least hundreds of millions, I forget the term exactly, and he wasn't questioned about it last night. Is there any argument that you can think of that could be made that he in fact did pay a lot of those taxes directly, not just in terms of the standard taxes that people have to pay on behalf of their employees, but something personal? Or does he have to open up his taxes in order to make that clear?
First of all, we need to talk about Donald Trump's pathological lies. 20,000 lies since he's been president of the United States, according to the Washington Post, which is keeping track of these things. And again, we've never seen anything like this. Sure, presidents stretched the truth in the past and have lied outright, but nothing like this. And there's nothing that you can put any faith in anything that Donald Trump says, except that it's going to be whatever in his mind at the moment suits his own interests. That's really the key to his tweets, the key to his speech, and the key to his actions. It's all about self-interest, not the national interest. Take a look at the successive national security advisors that he has had, Defense Secretary Mattis, Tillerson, all of these advisors, closest aides in the national security realm came to the conclusion that the President of the United States is a danger himself to the national security of the United States. This too has never happened in our history, that one aide after another to the president has become to believe that the president himself is a danger to the national security, can't be entrusted with the national security. So this goes back to the very question you're asking about why should we believe Donald Trump about his taxes, which he's tried to hide for all these years. The Times has clearly gotten its hands on tax documents that are definitive for a large, for a great number of years. Is it possible that Trump paid some taxes in some years to some entities, state governments? But whatever the case, it is absolutely clear that he's a tax cheat. And I'll tell you a little story. About 2.5 years ago, I found myself in a city where I knew that one of his principal accountants, who set up this tax structure that he has used for all these years, lived. And so I said, I'm going to cancel my plane reservation to go back to New York, and I'm going to go knock on this person's door. And I did that. And I spent about an hour with this person. He was reluctant to see me, very nice person. And he explained to me how he set up, he and others set up, I won't say whether or not he was the principal, he may not have been, but he was certainly present at the creation, set up this tax structure that Trump has used through these years. And in talking to other real estate people in New York, it's not too dissimilar in some ways that other real estate families have set up their tax structure to take advantage of the tax code so that they roll things over and pay minimal taxes. But then this person said that he had stayed in touch with his colleagues after he left the Trump organization. And that really the problem is that Trump then took this tax structure and pushed it way beyond the limits to which it was intended. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Once again, look, Trump is a con man. Trump is someone who has never paid his bills. Trump is someone who sues those who do work for him if they seek to be paid. That he settles 10, 20, 30 cents on the dollar for his bills. Many of us wrote and said on the air during the election that Trump was nowhere near as wealthy as he was claiming. In fact, that he might even be underwater. And indeed, we now get a much better picture of the lies behind his claims of being a competent businessman. There's nothing competent about what he's done in business except to enrich himself through cheating and conning. That's really what his business is. And he's now enlisted his children in the same cons, in the same methodologies. And we'll have to see where the tax cases go. And I think we all should not jump to some conclusions initially that this is necessarily indictable tax fraud. It may well be. There's certainly suggestions of it. At the same time, ordinarily, IRS cases are civil in nature, and there are civil penalties rendered. But here is certainly a set of facts that prosecutors are going to look at if they get the chance, and they'll render a judgment about whether or not it is fraud and other things that may be illegal.
You mentioned at the outset the Republicans in the House, and then, of course, I think most importantly, probably in the Senate. And the next opportunity that might arise for the Republicans in the Senate to actually take action that would be deleterious to President Trump is the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett to the U.S. Supreme Court, regardless of how hypocritical it might be in terms of the timing by comparison to what happened with Merrick Garland and Obama. They have the power to do that. That's something that the party has wanted to do since anybody can remember. How could they possibly not do that now, given the promises that they have all made to their Republican constituents who say that's the most important thing they know about?
They're going to do it. That's the answer. And they have the power to do it. And it's extremely unlikely that the Democrats are going to have any way of stopping it. And there should be no surprises about this. This is perfectly consistent with what Trump has said and done. And there's no reason to be surprised.
But you talked about Republicans as if they had.
It would be a big surprise were he not to ram through his own nominee. That would really be a surprise. And also, it feeds his political base, among other things. But also, Trump, this is something he said he was going to do too. I mean, there's a bit of a myth that the things Trump said he was going to do when he ran, he doesn't do. There are a number of things that he promised that he has done, and particularly in the area of deregulation, on the environment, on all of the things that most Democrats, many Republicans, not his Republicans, but the Republican Party that preceded him, believed in terms of, Nixon, the Environmental Protection Act was enacted under Richard Nixon. It was sponsored by his White House. But the deregulation that he has accomplished, Trump, he told us he was going to do this, and he's done it. And he's done it by every means possible, by executive order, by legislation, and the other thing is the judgeships. He's done it.
one of the major issues, of course, is the separation of church and state. And when Judge Barrett was confirmed by the Senate in the past, Dianne Feinstein asked her about her Catholicism and to what extent she was, in fact, devoted to that religion. How dangerous is it for the Democrats under these circumstances to raise that issue, not just because so many other justices on the Supreme Court already are, in fact, Catholics, but because it appears that, or will appear, that the Democrats are, in fact, using that issue in an inappropriate way?
I think they should be very careful. I think there are legitimate ways of asking the question, will you be guided by your interpretation of the law when it comes to the questions that you're asking about, Warren? Or is there a conflict with your religious beliefs? I mean, that kind of question, it seems to me, in a civil way, that's fair game. Other justices, I think, have been asked same in the past. They don't hold me to it, but I think they have. But the real question, it seems to me, that, and also, given what she has said in the past about, and from the bench as well, about questions of abortion related to Roe, et cetera, et cetera. There's no question about where she stands on this issue. And is it possible that on the court that she might somehow not cast her vote as a justice to repeal Roe and instead further gut it? I suppose that's possible, but it seems to me it's pretty clear that she is an adamant opponent of Roe v. Wade and has expressed that. I don't think, again, that we're going to have any surprises there. The area where there might be some effective questioning and really vigorous questioning and demands that she recuse herself are not necessarily on questions having to do with Roe, but rather with related to this election. That given the nature and timing of her appointment, and that the justices are in all likelihood going to be asked to decide some aspects of this coming election and its results, there it seems to me that there is real cause for her to be questioned at really great length and detail, and a pretty good prima facie case that she ought to recuse herself. But will that happen? Will she recuse herself? I wouldn't make any bets on it.
Why should she recuse herself? Presumably she will be nominated according to the appropriate procedures. She'll have enough people in the U.S. Senate to put her on the court. Isn't she then entitled to make a decision in whatever case might come up, including, for example, Obamacare, if she's going to be there in time to actually hear the arguments on that one on the 10th of November? That's being used a lot. But it's often said when a justice is being confirmed, well, you can't ask them about a specific case. That's not fair. They haven't heard the arguments yet, so on and so forth. They won't have heard the arguments yet with regard to the presidential succession either. So why is it important then, or why is it legitimate to demand from her that she recuse herself or indicate in advance how she might vote when that wouldn't happen with another kind of case?
Not suggesting that she indicate how she's going to vote, but rather that the nature and timing of her appointment, which is not traditional, that there is certainly a suggestion that she is somehow might be beholden or to Donald Trump, that she might the fact of and timing of this would suggest that it might be very hard for her to render a decision based on law and fact, as opposed to her patron in this case of a few weeks earlier. I think those are really legitimate questions, and the unique timing, and in fact, Trump himself has been pretty frank with some people about that's another reason that he wanted a justice appointed now, so that he or she might be able to sit on the question of the election.
We don't know what they have talked about in the private. We no doubt never will know what they've talked about in private. I suppose it's possible that they made some sort of agreement, but you're not accusing them of that, are you?
I don't think that's necessary, and I don't think that's what this is about. I think that's a rabbit hole.
Okay. What about the history of the court, and how apolitical is it? We talk again and again and again about which justices were appointed by which presidents, and it always has a political cast to it, even though, of course, some justices, historically speaking, have done things that the presidents didn't want them to do. Earl Warren did civil rights, and Dwight Eisenhower didn't like that, and they hated each other ever after. But are we, it seems to me, excessively idealistic when we say that this is an agency that in some way, even though it's the third branch of government, isn't going to be political? Isn't it, of course, political? Isn't it inevitably political?
Well, certainly it has a political element to it, but also the history of the court shows many, many instances in which the justices or justices of the Supreme Court have committed themselves to their interpretation of law and fact without regard for their personal politics. They're great examples of it. And they're also great examples of people who came to the court with expectations of being of one ideology, and it turns out they were exactly the opposite. Justice Black, for one, Earl Warren, as you mentioned, another, Justice Souter, another, Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice has been a Chief Justice, perhaps not in the quote political mold that was expected by many of those senators, Republican senators who confirmed him. He has tried to find a consensus on the court. Remember, he is one who so far is responsible for Obamacare not being thrown out by the court, for putting together a majority and an opinion that upheld aspects of the Affordable Care Act. So, of course, people are political. Reporters are political. We all have political beliefs, and the idea that we don't have political philosophies and the like is absurd. Whether we're politicians, reporters, but there also is an expectation that the principles of our profession, whether we're journalists, whether we're judges, that those are the principles that obtain. And there's a great tradition on the Supreme Court of that being the case. Look, is it any surprise that justices who have come from lower courts with a record of a certain conservative or liberal judicial philosophy continue that philosophy on the Supreme Court? No, that's not surprising, and presidents have put them there for that reason. But also, there are many things that happen on the Supreme Court where justices try to form a consensus, are not ideological. So I think that that's become less true. The Clarence Thomas nomination was a good example of a fight over ideology, among other things, from the very beginning. But I think we have reason to hope and expect as a nation of laws that presidential appointments to the Supreme Court will be of people who find fact and law, but obviously they are going to bring a philosophy to that.
We've got a lot of good questions already from the audience, and I want to start asking them. I don't want to dominate the proceedings completely, but I have to ask you before we go. Richard Nixon went down in part because of tapes. Now here, your former colleague Bob Woodward has tapes of President Trump in making all of these extraordinarily deleterious statements. I don't know how else to describe them. Why does a man in that position allow himself to be taped? Maybe in Nixon's case, it was semi-accidental, but President Trump practically volunteered.
Well, let's look at Nixon's tapes first and why Nixon decided to tape his every word, including on the telephone and in the office and in the secondary office that he had and in his meetings. And the most compelling answer to that question, which is there's some real evidence for, is Nixon never thought that, one, he didn't even think the tapes would become, their existence would become publicly disclosed. And two, he wanted, and he was frank with others about this, he wanted to write the greatest memoir of any president. And believed that, and incidentally, Nixon's writing is fascinating. He's a good writer and capable of being a very thoughtful person, unlike the Donald Trump non-parallel. So he thought that having these tapes would help him write the greatest memoir, perhaps of any president, which he really wanted to be regarded as a great president by history. Then, once the tapes were disclosed, and he refused to give them up, as you know, he thought that they could be used selectively to undermine John Dean's testimony and claims. They could use the edited transcripts, which he tried to produce for people old enough, as I am, to remember all this.
Me too.
And then, of course, back to the Supreme Court. And he also thought, and here this is very interesting, goes back to your question about justices. He had appointed Warren Burger to be the Chief Justice of the United States. And Nixon had, and Burger was kind of a hack judge before he got to the court. And Nixon had every expectation that Burger would make sure that he didn't have to give up those tapes. And what happened? Burger insisted that there be a unanimous decision that Richard Nixon give up those tapes, because he was committed to the principle that no one in this country is above the law, including the President of the United States.
Let me just cut you off. I want to get to the audience questions, and I just very briefly, what about the fact that Donald Trump allowed himself to be taped by Bob Woodward?
Trump always thinks he can charm anybody. And he should have thought twice about doing this with Woodward. But that's his MO. And he can be charming. I mean, he really can be. I've been there and I've witnessed it, and it can be disarming. And at the same time, we know his pathology. And
okay, so be careful who you're being charming to, I guess would be the response to that.
Also,
I want to go to
the other reason. Let me give the other reason. Is that
sure. Okay.
Woodward had asked, Bob had asked him to sit down with him for his previous book on the Trump presidency, Fear. Trump had refused. The book was very revealing and not flattering to Trump in the least. So Trump thought, okay, this time I'll give it a try.
Okay. Very interesting question from Roz, because it came up last night. Donald Trump tried to make this point. She asks, why did the Democrats leave so many judgeships vacant in the year before Trump was inaugurated?
I believe the answer is not what Trump claimed, but rather that the Senate, with the Republicans able to use the filibuster, among other things, had no intention of confirming many judicial nominations that had been made by Obama. Somebody who is better schooled and has the numbers and figures in front of them than I should figure out what that exact ratio and number is. But I think that's a big part of it. But no, I don't believe that Trump was truthful last night in his answer to that question.
Alan wants to know, in the event that the Democrats have the opportunity because they have taken control of the Senate, should they pack the court?
I certainly, Roosevelt tried to pack the court and was not successful at it. And my own gut feeling is the answer would be to be very reluctant to do it. That the institution has served us pretty well. Less so perhaps in recent years. I think it's become much more a legitimate question than it has been in the years since Roosevelt failed to pack the court. I think let's see what happens in terms of the election. That's the first thing. And let's see what happens in terms of the Congress of the United States. Certainly, I would say it's something that should be done with the greatest of reluctance, because if the court then becomes overtly politicized by both sides in this way, but I think I wouldn't say no. I think we got to wait and see. Let me add one.
Here's a question from John. He wants to say, what is your feeling about the prosecution? Oops, excuse me.
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go.
No. Go ahead.
John wants to know, what's your feeling about prosecuting Trump's enablers after November 3rd?
I'm not sure which enablers he's talking about. He's talking about the people prosecuting. I mean, his real enablers are the Republicans in Congress. I'm not sure that the Republicans in Congress have broken the law, but they have done the nation a disservice, the likes of which perhaps we've never seen a political party do in their willingness to march in lockstep with a president of the United States who is demonstrably unfit to be the president of the United States. Let's take a look at the Senate for a minute. And I can say this with great confidence because I've talked to some of them myself, and I know what's going on to a certain extent there. There are easily 15 or more Republican members of the United States Senate who despise and hate Donald Trump. They're craven. They haven't stood up to him. They're worried about their own ability to get elected, that their constituents would toss him out if they broke with Trump. But they despise what Trump has done in many regards because they recognize that he's a pathological liar. They recognize that he has no interest, that he's lawless. They know who this man is. And in fact, the other thing is there is a small group of Republican senators that even now has started to talk, and it's a small group, but they are talking with each other about if Trump tries to hold on to the office when it's clear that he has been defeated, or this small group of senators is determined to lead a movement to get him the hell out we'll see what happens. But I can tell you that with some confidence. But it's not 15 or 20, but it's a small group, but they're talking and meeting about it.
And you're talking about sitting senators who might not be losing their jobs in the election?
Yes. Well, it wouldn't matter if they were losing their jobs or not in the election, because they're going to be sitting. They're going to be sitting up until the end of this session of Congress, which doesn't end until January the 3rd. I believe that's the right date. It's not consonant with, it's not contiguous with the January 20th inauguration of the president. But what I was about to say is, we need to look at Donald Trump as sui generis. He bears no relationship to any president in the history of the United States. In terms, and is he worse than Nixon? Is his conduct of the presidency worse than Watergate, worse than Richard Nixon? Absolutely. And it's apparent to any person, it seems to me, who's willing to look at fact. This is someone incapable of being truthful, who has never put the interest of the country. If somebody, I'm willing to sit here and say, okay, here's where, and listen to somebody say Donald Trump really put the interest of the country in front of his own self-interest. But I'd like to see the examples of it. Certainly those who have served with him don't believe that he has put, many of them, the interest of the country before self-interest. And I think we really need to talk a little bit here. I'm going to take a little moment here to talk about national security concerns. Because again, his closest national security, look at Dan Coates, the former director of national intelligence, conservative Christian, born again Christian, Republican senator, who concluded that he thought that Putin has something, as he put it, on Trump, that there's no other explanation in Coates's, he didn't have evidence of it, but his belief that in terms of why Trump has sought to do Putin's bidding, a whole idea. Let's look at what Putin has done during the Trump presidency, and even preceding it. Putin is a real genius who has destabilized the West. Here's a country, Russia, with 3-4% of the world's GDP, and this guy has destabilized the post-war order. And after Russia lost, the USSR lost the Cold War. But Donald Trump has really enabled Putin to take this somewhere else. Why? I did a story about 10 weeks ago about Trump's phone calls with world leaders, in which it demonstrated how, with the authoritarian thugs like Erdogan in Turkey, MBS in Saudi Arabia, Putin, he continuously sought their approval, did their bidding. And in terms of our allies, Theresa May, Angela Merkel, he actually verbally abused them, and called them stupid, verbally abused them in a way that you would never treat an ally. What's the explanation for all this? Well, I think some of it we're going to find out, and this is why the tax returns are useful or the tax story is useful in another regard, is let's take a look at something Eric Trump said a while back. I got it in front of me here. Well, we don't rely on American banks. We have all the funding we need out of Russia. And that was in talking about golf courses in particular.
2014, he said that.
That's right. So yeah. And also, we also have a fact, look at Nixon. Nixon is somebody who understood history, knows history. Trump has no notion of history, but he also has no notion of the meaning of American democracy. And we're seeing that today in the most horrendous of ways, unlike anything we've seen.
Let me just say you're asking some of the or answering some of the questions that are being asked by our listeners. Katie wanted to know, excuse me, Denise wanted to know if you think Trump is worse than Nixon. You certainly passed your judgment on that
Not
one.
even close. Not even close. And it's interesting, Odie, you know, Watergate also was about an attempt to undermine the free electoral system in this country. It was about a campaign of political espionage and sabotage to undermine the Democrats' campaign. But what Trump is doing is far more insidious. And also his willingness, use the word collusion, whatever you want, his willingness in the 2016 campaign to almost invite help from the Russians. Certainly this is something that you can draw a real distinction with all his predecessors.
David wants to know, should Biden rather continue to debate Trump?
Look, I'm not in the business of advising presidents. I don't know why he would want to at this stage. I think we've you know, if he thinks that it's to his, Biden thinks it's to his advantage to continue to go into that forum, more power to him. But I certainly, there's a very good piece by Frank Bruni in the New York Times on this subject today. But as I say, I'm not in the business of making recommendations to presidential candidates, but I sure as hell can't see why he would want to do it after what we saw there.
Denise wants to know, especially compared to the Nixon era, what about Fox News and how important has that been? How has the media changed since then?
Fox News is the most important political force in this country of the last quarter century. It changed our political equations. Obviously, the people who believe in Fox News are people who felt underrepresented in the press. I think you can make some arguments that the mainstream news over the years has not done as good a job of reporting as we should have. Not necessarily for ideological reasons, maybe more out of laziness that's endemic that goes with any profession. But Fox News was invented by Roger Ailes, not as a legitimate news organization, but to represent a political point of view. First, before the facts. It's one thing to have a political philosophy or commitment to a certain ideology or party even. But even then, to be so unconcerned with fact and truth as Fox News has shown itself to be. That said, there are a few really good reporters at Fox News. There have been.
Well, let me ask you this. When he first started Fox News, was it true that the media, Washington Post, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, the networks, really were much more liberal than they ought to have been, given their claim to produce news that is straightforward and not in any way slighted one way or another in terms of politics, if that is in fact even possible?
No, I don't think, I think by and large, this is a whole other discussion we could spend, and it really requires a kind of nuance in history that it's impossible to do justice to the question right here. But let me say this briefly. That, first of all, most of the great newspapers in this country traditionally have been owned by Republicans. And that the history, now there are some exceptions to that. The New York Times has been, the owners of the Times have been fierce in portraying themselves for a century now as not beholden to any political party. But in terms of the news agenda, I think that if you were to look at what the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, Los Angeles Times, you're in LA, people there read the LA Times for years and years when it was owned by the Chandler family. I would hardly say that the agenda of the Chandler family was some kind of liberal democratic objective. So I don't think. And also look at Bill Paley. Let's look at Bill Paley at CBS. No, I think the answer is no. That and the reporting, especially of these great news institutions. Should we have had perhaps, or should we have had made more of an effort to have people who are reporters and are openly conservative in their beliefs as reporters? I would say the answer is yes, but I think that, I went to work when I was 16 years old at the Washington Star, another great newspaper, a Republican newspaper. Going back to the time of, and let me tell you, at the Washington Star and the Washington Post, under great editors at both papers, our news columns at both those papers were absolutely about what real journalism is, the best obtainable version of the truth. And that's really, the thing about reporting is great reporting, good reporting takes a lot of effort. You can't do it if you're lazy, if you're careless. And this is another discussion, but the failures of our journalism have to do with laziness, not with political prejudice, with it, particularly in the internet age. What did we do in Watergate? Very kind of basic, almost elemental police reporting techniques. Bob talks about this all the time, and so do I. We went and knocked on people's doors at night. People who we thought might have information. And we said, well, it doesn't make much sense to go call them on the telephone at their offices or go see them in their offices when they're going to be subject to pressure and intimidation. Let's go try and visit them at home at night. That's basically what we still do. But most reporters may not do that. It takes perseverance. It takes continuing to go after the facts. And also, simple facts strung together are not the best obtainable version of the truth. Context is a huge element of what the best obtainable version of the truth is. It's not about 50-50 giving one person in a story or one side of an argument 50% of column inches or 50% of the length of the story on the air and 50% to the other. Let's just take the simple example of a bank robbery and apply it to the rest of what we cover in the news. So you got a bank robbery, you got some cameras there. The guy comes in, he holds up the bank, goes out the door, he gets arrested. And sure enough, he's shown with his gun holding up on the videotape, holding up the bank. And his lawyer then goes on with a diatribe about how his client was nowhere in the vicinity of the bank and gives all kinds of alibis. Are we supposed to give that 50% and 50%? That's really, but really it's the same in politics. It's the same in everything we cover in terms of the best obtainable version of the truth. We've got to use common sense. The other thing about reporters is they tend to be lousy listeners.
I got to ask you one more question about what we've talked about so far. And that is, given all that has been said, all that you have said about the situation now and the fact that President Trump is moving in the direction of, or has already perhaps begun a new Cold Civil War, and perhaps even hot Civil War.
The Cold Civil War, one sec, if I may. The Cold Civil War preceded Donald Trump. It's been going on in this country for 20, 25, 30 years. He exploited
deliberately ignited is what you said. Then it already exists.
He
Is he
exploited
igniting
it in terms of winning the presidency, and he's exploited it through his presidency to cause further division with no attempt at uniting this country. It's, you know, most presidents have tried to find some way to unite the people of this country. This president has done nothing but try to divide.
All of the things that we talk about and all the issues that exist now, are we in a situation where democracy is really seriously under threat in the United States? Or can you be more optimistic than that?
You could. There's no reason to be optimistic about it being under threat. It is beyond under threat that we have lost in this presidency essential elements of democratic process by a lawless president with no understanding of the history of this country, of its institutions, of the history of democracy, respect for democratic principles. No, this is a moment certainly unlike any other in modern American history and probably in our whole history. The President of the United States with no interest in democratic principles, no interest whatsoever have we seen from this president in real democracy or democratic principles.
But can we survive this?
Say that again. Can we survive?
Can we survive this?
I don't know the answer, but I think we've already seen the erosion of our democracy. It didn't begin with Donald Trump, but Donald Trump has taken it and taken his own rabid mindset and brought to the destruction of our democratic principles and institutions and processes something that has never, ever in our history been brought by a president of the United States. And the result of this, we are in the middle of a real fight for democracy and the future of democracy. It's a more complicated problem than just Donald Trump, but Donald Trump is a threat unlike any president in our history. But also, when you look, you've also got to question whether our Constitution works anymore as it was intended. And some of those questions predate Donald Trump. But right now, the immediate horror facing this country is a president of the United States committed to undermining democracy for his own interest. Never been anything like this.
All right, we're going to have to leave it at that. Carl Bernstein, it's been an extraordinary opportunity to talk with you, and thank you so much for covering so many different subjects so very, very comprehensively, and I much appreciate the opportunity. So many thanks to you. Thanks to you in the audience as well. Next week's program will feature Henry Waxman and Planned Parenthood's Alex McGill Johnson. Madeline Brand will be the moderator, and they'll be focusing on healthcare today and over the next 4 years. Thanks again to Jews for Democracy and Justice, and great to have you with us as well. And many thanks for tonight.